There's a sound I can't hear anymore. That's not a poetic thing. That's a medical thing. The audiologist in Pensacola, 1973, told me I had sustained bilateral high-frequency loss consistent with prolonged exposure to industrial noise. He wrote that on a form. He gave me a copy of the form. I still have it somewhere. What he didn't write on the form, what I didn't tell him to write, was the other thing, the thing below sound. You know how a bass speaker in a car can rattle your mirrors without you hearing a note. It's not the ears. It's the chest, the rib cage, your teeth, if it's strong enough. That's 18 hertz, below the threshold where the ear starts picking it up. But the body knows. The body always knows. I feel it, right now. Sitting here, pressure like a thumb pressed from the inside against my sternum. Not hard, not urgent, just present. The way a scar is present. You stop noticing it every minute, and then you press on it, and there it is. I felt that for 53 years. I'm not a man who tells stories. I was a petty officer second class in the United States Navy. I ran sonar equipment on surveillance vessels for 6 years. I have never given an interview. The one time a journalist called me, 1992, a woman from somewhere in New England who'd gotten a partial name from somewhere. I hung up. I'm not proud of that. I'm telling you now, because hanging up doesn't work anymore. Because the thing I was asked to keep quiet about is not staying quiet. They are moving north. I know that because I can feel when they're close. That pressure in the chest. Closer now than it's been since 1971. I have a piece of paper I will tell you about in a while. A strip of thermal chart paper, 14 inches long, folded in thirds in a vacuum-sealed plastic bag inside a steel coffee tin on the top shelf of my hall closet. It's been there since 1974. It survived 2 divorces, 4 moves, 1 house fire that took the garage, but not the closet. When people ask if I have any Navy memorabilia, I tell them no. That piece of paper is the only proof I have that any of this happened. And it's enough. Let me take you back. Because this story doesn't start with what we found. It starts with where we were looking, and why, and what we thought we were going to hear. The year was 1971, November. I was 24 years old, assigned to the USNS Stalwart, a surveillance vessel operating out of Rota, Spain. The Stalwart was a T-Agos, meaning it was an ocean surveillance ship, meaning its entire reason for existing was to drag a very long cable through very deep water and listen to what was down there. The cable was called a Surtas array, towed sonar. We'd thread it out behind the ship like a needle pulling thread, and it would hang in the deep sound channel and pick up anything moving below us for 200 miles in any direction. The SOSUS program, I can tell you about it now because they declassified it in 1991. Sound Surveillance System. Strings of hydrophones laid across the ocean floor at specific depths, tuned to the acoustic shadow zone, where sound bounces around the thermal layers and travels impossibly far. You could hear a Soviet nuclear submarine leaving Murmansk from a listening post in Iceland. That's not an exaggeration. That's what the system was designed to do. And it did it. That's what the system was designed to do. And it did it. What it wasn't designed to do, what nobody had designed anything to do, was what happened to us 400 miles southeast of the Azores, above a section of the mid-Atlantic ridge called the Lucky Strike. Segment. Lucky Strike. That's what the oceanographers called it. I have thought about that name a lot over 50 years. The Stalwart's sonar division was 4 men. There was me, Ray Dukes, 24, from Macon, Georgia, 2 years out of Sonar A school at Dan Neck, Virginia. There was Walsh. Aaron Walsh was a petty officer first class from Buffalo, New York. 12 years in the Navy by 1971 and the most accurate ears I have ever encountered before or since. He could hear a contact and thermal noise that everyone else had written off as biologics. He had this habit. He'd pull one earpiece off his headset and let it hang so he could hear the room while he was monitoring the audio feed. He said it helped him context switch. Commander Hargrove hated it. Walsh did it anyway. Walsh Walsh had a daughter named Claire who was 6 years old in 1971, and he had a school photo of her taped to the bottom left corner of his scope console, right where the light from the screen didn't reach so it stayed up without bleaching. Claire with a gap where a front tooth was coming in, smiling at something off camera. Walsh talked about her the way other men talked about sports. She liked horses. She was learning to read. She had apparently given a speech at her school about dolphins. Walsh thought that was the funniest and best thing he'd ever heard, and he brought it up regularly. He had this laugh that came out of him like something falling downstairs, big, rolling, uncontrolled, and every time he told the dolphin story he laughed that laugh. The other two on our team were Petty Officer 3rd Class Denny Hale, who was 19 and had been assigned to us 6 weeks prior, from Dam Neck, still learning to read the display, and a chief named Ferris who ran the division technically but mostly left day-to-day operations to Walsh and me, because Walsh and I had been doing this longer than Ferris had held the chief's rating. The other two on our team were Petty Officer 3rd Class Denny Hale, who was 19 and had been assigned to us 6 weeks prior from Dam Neck, still learning to read the display, and a chief named Ferris who ran the division technically, but mostly left day-to-day operations to Walsh and me, because Walsh and I had been doing this longer than Ferris had held the chief's rating. The commanding officer of the Stalwart was Commander Miles Hargrove. Hargrove was not a villain. I know how easy it is to make a man a villain in hindsight, and I'm not doing that. He was a very competent naval officer operating in a framework that made complete sense for the world he understood, and the world he understood turned out to be about 30% of the actual world. He was 47. He had a wife in Norfolk, and 2 sons, both of whom he'd put through Virginia Military Institute on his own dime. He ran the Stalwart the way a man runs a machine he is proud of, efficiently, methodically, with no patience for ambiguity. He did not like ambiguity. In his world, it wasn't a flaw. In our world, in November of 1971, 400 miles from the Azores, it turned out to be the thing that killed people. The civilian attached to our operation was Dr. Elaine Marsh. She was from DARPA's Ocean Surveillance Program, a liaison, which meant she had scientific clearance to observe our data collection and provide analysis without access to our operational tasking. She was 42, maybe 43, originally from the Oceanographic Program at Woods Hole. She was 42, maybe 43, originally from the Oceanographic Program at Woods Hole. She had published work on deep ocean acoustic propagation and on the geophysics of mid-ocean ridge hydrothermal systems. She had short gray-brown hair, and she wore the same 2 sweaters for the entire deployment, alternating, and she drank coffee she brewed herself in a press in her cabin, because the ship's coffee, she said, was corrosive. She was the first person I ever met who used the word system the way other people use the word alive. She'd say, "This ridge system is behaving interestingly." In the same tone, someone else would say, "That animal looks agitated." I thought it was a verbal tic. I understand now it was precision. Our mission tasking for the November deployment was surveillance monitoring. Standard pattern. We were to run the SIRTAS array along a specific deepwater track, logging acoustic traffic, looking for Soviet submarine signatures that had been reported operating in the Central Atlantic. Routine work. We'd done it a dozen times on this vessel and on the one before it. The first day out of Rota was uneventful. The second day was uneventful. The second day was uneventful. On the third day, Walsh pulled one earpiece off his headset, turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, and said, "Dukes, what is 78.3 knots?" I was running the display. The SIRTAS output was on the main scope, and we had the strip chart recorder running underneath it. Thermal paper, rolling slow, burning the acoustic picture onto the page in real time. The display showed our towed array's field of coverage, a cone reaching south and west from the ship. The sound channel below us at about 3,000 feet. The seabed of the mid-Atlantic ridge at somewhere between 9 and 14,000 feet, depending on where you were on the ridge topography. I looked at where Walsh was pointing. The contact was on bearing 214, which put it south-southwest of us. And it was in the deep sound channel, meaning it was reading in the acoustic shadow layer, meaning it was real. not surface noise or biologics. Range estimate, 60 to 8 miles, and the contact was moving. 78.3 knots, Walsh said again. That's what the range rate's giving me. I looked at the numbers. I ran the calculation again. The contact had been detected at 68 miles. The contact had been detected at 68 miles. The strip chart showed it had been there for the previous 4 hours, moving very slowly, maybe 2 or 3 knots, the kind of drift you get from a submerged object, riding a current. And then, in the last 40 minutes of recording, the range had dropped hard. It was at 49 miles now. Software glitch, I said. I ran the hardware calc, Walsh said. Same number. I put the headset on. The deep channel audio was mostly thermal noise, that soft roar like rain on a tin roof, and underneath it the low creak and groan of the ridge itself. The geological noise you always got above active seafloor spreading. Nothing intelligible, no blade signatures, no propulsion harmonics. Nothing that said man-made machine. Contacts at 46 miles now, Hale said from the secondary display. He was watching the passive tracker, and his voice was very flat and careful, the way young people get when they're not sure if they're allowed to be scared yet. In 5 minutes, the contact had moved 2 miles. At that rate, it was moving toward us at roughly 24 miles per hour, 21 knots, which was fast, but not impossible. A sprint-capable Soviet submarine could theoretically do 28 knots submerged. A sprint-capable Soviet submarine could theoretically do 28 knots submerged, except the range rate calculation was based on the last 40 minutes, not the last 5 minutes. And the last 40-minute rate was 78.3 knots, which no submarine in any navy on Earth in 1971 could do. Log it, Walsh said. Contact designated Sierra 1. I'm going to walk it up the chain. He went to get Chief Ferris. I kept listening. And underneath the thermal noise, under the ridge creek, I started to feel something. Not hear. Feel. A pressure in the chest, low and slow, like someone pressing a palm against my sternum. From the inside, it was very faint. I thought it was the ventilation system. I thought it was the ship's engines. I reached up and pressed my hand flat against my chest, the way you do when you think you're about to burp. And nothing happened, and the pressure was still there. It's been there, to varying degrees, for every day of my life since. Chief Ferris came to the sonar room with Walsh. He looked at the display, ran the numbers himself, looked at Walsh, and said, software artifact. I ran it on the strip chart, Walsh said. Could be a paper speed issue. Check the paper drive. Ferris watched the display for another 10 minutes. Could be a paper speed issue. Checked the paper drive. Ferris watched the display for another 10 minutes. The contact maintained bearing 214, now at 31 miles, now at 29. Still no acoustic signature to put a name on it. No propulsion noise. No blade cavitation. Just presence. Mass in the water, moving, tracked by the pressure differential it created in the sound channel. Log it as an unclassified subsurface contact, Ferris said. I'll notify the commander. Hargrove came down 30 minutes later. He stood behind me, reviewed the strip chart, watched the display. He had his hands behind his back and his feet shoulder-width apart, which I later came to recognize as his thinking stance. Range, he said. 22 miles, sir, I said. Bearing steady? 214, sir. Steady throughout. Speed estimate? Walsh said. Best estimate still above 70 knots on the long calculation, sir. Short window rate now showing about 22 knots. Something changed in its behavior around 20 minutes ago. It slowed down. Hargrove said. Yes, sir. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Soviet deep diving research vessel. They've been experimenting with pump jet propulsion. Could be running a test profile. Sprint and dry feet. Don't log the speed anomaly. Could be running a test profile. Sprint and dry feet don't log the speed anomaly. Log it as unknown subsurface contact, probable Soviet origin. Keep it under observation and advise me immediately if it closes inside 15 miles. He left feet. Walsh and I looked at each other. Neither of us said anything. The contact drifted at 22 knots for another 3 hours. Then it stopped. Dead in the water at 18 miles. Dead south of us. Just sat there. We watched it on the display. Stationary. Holding position with no acoustic output, no propulsion signature, nothing. Like a rock in the water. Except rocks don't arrive at 78.3 knots. At 2200 hours, a second contact appeared. Sierra 2, bearing 187, range 94 miles. At 0100, a third. Sierra 3, bearing 231, range 112 miles. By the time I went off watch at 0400, there were 5 contacts in the water south of us, all stationary, all at depth, arranged in a rough arc, a semicircle, with Sierra 1 at the apex. Walsh was still on the scope when I leaf-feet. He had both earpieces on, which he never did. Dr. Marsh came to the sonar room the next morning. Ferris let her observe, and she stood at the display and looked at the 5 contact tracks for a long time, without saying anything. Ferris let her observe, and she stood at the display and looked at the 5 contact tracks for a long time without saying anything. Then she picked up the strip chart and ran her finger along the velocity trace for Sierra 1. "That's real," she said. "Not a question. We checked the equipment twice," Walsh said. "What's the depth estimate on these contacts?" "Deep channel for the original detections," I said. "Probably around 3,000 feet. I hesitated. But Sierra 1's depth estimate has been dropping. We've been watching it, passive ranging off the sound layer. Best estimate right now puts it around 11,000 feet. Maybe deeper." Marsh looked up from the strip chart. Her expression was very still. "What's the seabed depth at our current position?" she asked. 14,200 feet, I said. "We're above a rift valley on the Lucky Strike segment." She set the strip chart down. She went to the porthole. The sonar room had one small porthole, just a circle of gray November Atlantic, and stood there a moment looking at it. "The contacts that appeared overnight," she said. "Are they at the same depth?" "Approximately," Walsh said. "Are they at the same depth?" "Approximately," Walsh said. "They came in at depth and haven't moved." "Are they oriented toward the center of the rift?" I pulled the bathymetric overlay and plotted the 5 contact positions against the ridge topography. Sierra 1 was directly above the deepest section of the rift valley. Sierras 2 through 5 were around it, at the rift's eastern and western shoulders. "Yes," I said. She nodded, once, like she was confirming something she'd already suspected. "I'd like to request sediment sample analysis." "Do we have a core sample from this segment in the scientific stores?" "We picked up samples from a previous survey," I said. "Not from this exact location, about 40 miles north." "That'll do," she said. "I'd like to examine them." She left to get Hargrove's authorization. I don't know what she said to him. I know she got it, because 2 hours later she had the core samples in the small analysis lab after the officer's mess. And I know what she found, because she told me directly, later that afternoon, standing in the passageway outside the sonar room. She looked like someone had said something terrible to her, very quietly. "Ray," she said. "Ray," she said. She'd started calling me Ray somewhere in the first week of the deployment. "I need you to look at something." The analysis lab was about the size of a large closet. It had a bench-mounted microscope, a centrifuge, chemical storage, and enough room for 2 people to stand if they didn't mind being close. The core samples, gray-green sediment plugs from the mid-Atlantic ridge, packed in dated sample tubes, were laid out on the bench. One was open. Marsh had a slide prepared. "Look at this," she said, and stepped aside. "I've seen sediment samples before. I knew what they were supposed to look like. Mineral particles, microfossils, occasional shell fragments. Dead geological material. These weren't dead. I don't have the vocabulary for biology that I have for sonar. What I saw was movement, not random jiggle of particles in suspension. Directed movement. Cells, or things shaped like cells, things with what looked like walls and centers, moving in the same direction, together, in a current that wasn't there, on a fixed slide. And there was structure to it. Filaments, like the root threads of a fungus, except finer, and the spacing between them was regular, repeating, mathematical almost. That sample is 40 miles north of where those contacts are sitting, Marsh said. And it's already doing that. She paused. Those aren't mineral deposits. Those aren't any known biological community on record for this location. That structure, she pointed at the filaments through the eyepiece, is a network. That is a communication architecture. What does that mean? I said. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, she looked at the sample, not at me. The sediment on this section of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is not sediment. We are not sailing above a seafloor. A pause. We are sailing above a membrane. There it was. The shape of what was underneath. I felt it when she said it. The pulse in my chest kicked once, harder than it had been, like something far below had shifted its weight. I need to show this to Commander Hargrove, she said. She showed him. I was not in the room. What I know is what she told me afterward, and what I read on Hargrove's face when he came through the passageway an hour later. He was not shaken. That was what his face said. That was what his face said. He was composed in the way of a man who has decided that the most important thing he can do right now is remain composed. Walsh found me at the mess that evening. He set his coffee mug down and said, she showed him the sample. I know, I said. He said, that is consistent with known deep-sea biological communities and does not affect operational assessment. Neither of us spoke for a while. He's not wrong that you can make an argument, Walsh said. No, you can't, I said. Walsh looked at his coffee. No, he said. You can't. That night, Sierra 1 moved from 11,000 feet of depth, which had already been impossible, because no propulsion system we knew of could loiter against a ridge wall at 11,000 feet without making noise. From 11,000 feet, Sierra 1 ascended. Slowly. I was on the scope. I watched the depth estimate change. 10,000 feet. 9. 8. At 8,000 feet, Sierra 1 stopped. Then the sound came. Not a sound. A feeling. The pressure in my chest that had been a background note for 2 days suddenly intensified, like someone had turned a dial. It lasted about 4 seconds. Then stopped. Then again. And again. And again. It was rhythmic. Hale looked up from his display. You feel that? Yeah, I said. What is it? I don't know. I didn't tell him I'd been feeling a version of it for 2 days. I flipped through the passive audio channels, all frequencies, and at the low end, below 20 hertz, the strip chart was doing something it shouldn't. It was printing a wave. A slow, regular wave, not geological noise, which is random, not propulsion noise, which is harmonic and steady. A pulse. Timed. Like a heartbeat, at about 1 beat every 4 seconds. I picked up the interphone to the bridge. Bridge? Sonar? Sierra 1 has ascended to 8,000 feet depth estimate. We are tracking a low-frequency acoustic signal, sub-20 hertz, pulsed at regular intervals of approximately 4 seconds. I recommend we alert Dr. Marsh and request guidance from, what's Sierra 2 through 5 doing? The watch officer asked. I checked. All 4 contacts were moving, not ascending, converging, moving laterally towards Sierra 1's position, like they were being called. Sierra 2 through 5 are converging on Sierra 1's position, sir. Recommend. Thank you, Sonar. Log it. Log it. Commander Hargrove will review at morning brief. I set the interphone down. Walsh had come in for watch relief. He stood at the door and looked at the display and then at me. "Morning brief," he said. "Morning brief," I said. He took his station. I went to find Dr. Marsh. She was already awake. She'd been running water samples from the last CTD cast. Conductivity, temperature, depth sensor deployment, checking salinity and viscosity. She had a look when I found her in the lab that I'd call controlled alarm, like someone who's been checking the same thing repeatedly and getting the same wrong answer. "The water samples from the CTD cast this afternoon," she said, before I could speak. "Viscosity is elevated, not by much, a fraction of a percent, but it's consistent across all 3 depths sampled." "What does that mean?" "Seawater doesn't change viscosity like this without something being dissolved in it." Or, she stopped. "Or what?" "Or living in it," she said. "In sufficient density." She set the vial down carefully. "What did you come to tell me?" I told her about Sierra 1's ascent, the convergence, the pulse. She sat down on the lab stool and was quiet for a long moment. 4.0 second period, she said. 18 to 19 hertz frequency. You said the strip chart is showing it. Yes, that is infrasound. In that frequency range, infrasound travels through tissue. It causes disorientation, elevated heart rate, feelings of unease. In some mammals, it triggers fear responses. In confined spaces, continuous exposure causes serious psychological effects. I thought about the last 2 days, the thing in my chest, the way I hadn't been sleeping right. "It's been there since Sierra 1 first appeared," I said. She nodded. "They're signaling," she said. "The way a heart signals muscle tissue. There's a difference between communication and command." She stood up. "I need to get back to Hargrove. Tonight. Not morning brief." "He's not going to. I know he's not going to," she said. "I'm going anyway." Hargrove listened. I was outside the meeting, not invited, not authorized, but the passageway outside his sea cabin had thin bulkheads, and I had very good ears. Dr. Marsh laid out her case. The sample analysis, the filament structure, the network, the viscosity change in the water column, the coordinated movement of the contacts towards Sierra 1. The coordinated movement of the contacts towards Sierra 1, the infrasound pulse and its biological effects on human tissue. And then she said something I have never forgotten. "Commander, the seabed here is not an inert geological feature. The structure we're observing, the filament network in the sediment, the acoustic behavior of these contacts, the chemical changes in the water column, is consistent with a single organism of extraordinary geographic extent. We are not above a seafloor. We are above a skin." Silence from Hargrove's side of the bulkhead. Then, "Dr. Marsh, I appreciate your analysis. This vessel is on an operational surveillance tasking. The contacts we're tracking are exhibiting behavior consistent with Soviet deep-diving experimental assets in coordinated formation. The acoustic phenomenon you're describing is consistent with Soviet low-frequency active sonar transmissions. The biological observations in the sediment samples are interesting, and I will include them in my report to Naval Intelligence. We will maintain passive observation posture until I receive further guidance from Fleet. Commander, if these contacts are biological in nature..." "Dr. Marsh, good night." She came out of his sea cabin. "Good night." She came out of his sea cabin. She looked at me in the passageway. She knew I'd been listening. She didn't care. "He's scared," she said quietly. "That's something." She looked at the deck. It's not enough. 3 things happened the next morning. At 0615, the radio room reported a strange signal on the 160-meter band, a low-frequency band normally used for very long-range submarine communications. The signal was not Morse code. It was not voice. It was a series of tones in a sequence that a junior radio man named Tucker had been trying to decode for 2 hours. before he finally called up to the bridge to report it anomalous. At 0742, Sierra 1 moved again. Down. It went from 8,000 feet to 13,000 feet in approximately 11 minutes, a descent rate that no known vehicle, manned or unmanned, can execute without being destroyed by pressure differential. And it went quiet as it descended. The 4-second pulse stopped at 0744 and did not resume. At 0800, the radio room transmitted a routine weather update on the standard fleet circuit. And what came back was not weather. What came back was a recording. Walsh's voice. Walsh's voice. Walsh. In the sonar room, from the previous evening, his exact words when he'd sat down for watch relief. That's Sierra 1 at 8,000 feet. Dukes. What's your read? Except Walsh had never said those exact words in that order. It was pieces. Walsh's voice saying things he'd said at different times, stitched together into new sentences. Sierra 1, 8,000 feet. What's your read? Tucker got on the 1MC, the ship-wide intercom, and said, "This is radio. We have a loop signal on the fleet circuit. All stations verify comm security." Hargrove's voice came back 30 seconds later. "All hands. This is the commanding officer. We have a probable electronic warfare contact attempting signals disruption. This is a known Soviet tactic. All communications are to be treated as potentially compromised. Until further notice, radio will verify all transmissions. Carry on." I was in the sonar room when it happened. I looked at Walsh. Walsh had both earpieces on, which he never did. "That was me," he said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the display. That was my voice. "I know," I said. "I didn't say that." "I know," I said. "How does it?" He stopped. Started again. Started again. "How does it know what I sound like?" I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer. But I thought about what Dr. Marsh had said. Network. Communication architecture. The way a heart signals muscle tissue. The thing in the deep water had been listening. Since the first day. Since Sierra 1 had slowed to 18 miles and just sat there. Listening to every word we said. On every channel. It had been learning our voices the way you learn a language. By taking in pieces and putting them together. Until the pieces meant something. At 1100, Dr. Marsh requested another meeting with Hargrove. I know because I was in the passageway when she knocked, and I stayed there. This meeting was different. She was precise. No theories, just data. The signal intercept this morning was not a Soviet electronic warfare operation, she said. I've analyzed the recording. The tonal characteristics of that splice are consistent with natural acoustic processing, the kind performed by biological systems that use sound for communication. There is no known Soviet technology that can replicate vocal recordings with that resolution and recombine them in real time. This is not a technical capability. This is not a technical capability. This is an adaptive behavior. Doctor, it learned Walsh's voice from our sonar emissions, she said. Every time we pulsed the active array, every time we broadcast on fleet comms, it was sampling. And now it's demonstrating. It's showing us. It has the samples. Hargrove didn't answer immediately. Furthermore, Marsh said, I've been analyzing the chemical changes in the water column over the past 16 hours. The viscosity elevation is accelerating. If the trend continues, by this time tomorrow, the water immediately below us will have the approximate viscosity of a light engine oil. I don't know what that means for hull integrity or for the towed array, but I know it's not natural, and I know it's localized to our position. We are not drifting over this phenomenon, Commander. This phenomenon is tracking us. Another silence. I have requested guidance from Fleet and am awaiting a response. Hargrove said, How long has it been since your last communication was verified as authentic? A pause. All communications are verified through established protocol. Commander, are you confident that your last communication with Fleet was not intercepted and altered? A long pause. Are you confident that your last communication with Fleet was not intercepted and altered? A long pause. I will verify communications protocol, he said. His voice was not quite steady. For the first time. Thank you, Doctor. She came out into the passageway. She knew I'd been there again. She just looked at me. He's scared now, she said. That's something. A beat. Still not enough. She was right, and I'm going to tell you what made it not enough. Because it matters. Hargrove came up with a plan. He was going to ping the contacts with full-power active sonar, get hard returns, classify them definitively as Soviet assets, and report to Fleet with confidence, so Fleet would send backup and tell him what to do. That was the protocol. Uncertain contact, ambiguous classification, request assistance. He needed certainty to get help. Active sonar, maximum power. All contacts, simultaneously. Marsh heard about it. She found me in the passageway at 14:30, moving fast, pale. She grabbed my arm. He's going to ping them, she said. Full power active. I know, Ray. She was the only person on that ship who called me Ray. Full power active. I know, Ray. She was the only person on that ship who called me Ray. If those contacts are biological, if what's down there is biological and that large, and it has been learning us, and he puts a full power active ping into it. I know, I said. We need to leave. Right now. I have been trying to get him to understand. She stopped, took a breath. A full power sonar pulse in that frequency range, at the source level this ship can produce, will be to whatever is down there, like firing a flare gun directly into someone's face. After 2 days of it listening quietly to everything we say, I went to the sonar room. I pulled Walsh off his headset and told him what was coming. His face did something complicated. Can you stop him? He said. No, I said. Can she? She's trying. Walsh looked at the display. The 5 contacts were still in their positions. Sierra 1 deep, Sierras 2 through 5 at the rift's rim. All quiet. Stationary. They're waiting, Walsh said. He was not talking to me. He was looking at the display the way you look at something you're trying to understand before it's too late. They've been waiting since they got here. They've been waiting since they got here. Just waiting. At 15:23 hours, Hargrove ordered a full-power active sonar transmission on the underwater telephone frequency. 8.1 kilohertz. Enough power to light up every hydrophone in the SOS network from Iceland to the Azores. I had the headset on when it went out. What came back was not an echo. The return came in 0.7 seconds, which put the contact at approximately 1,000 yards. Half a mile. Not 14,000 feet down. Half a mile. Directly below us. And it wasn't a sonar return. A sonar return is a clean spike. In, out, decay. What came back was a response. The acoustic energy went down, and something down there took it in. And what came back was the same frequency, the same amplitude, but the waveform was different, like it had been processed, like something had heard our ping, tasted it, and sent something back. My auditory cortex years later in a therapist's office in Pensacola, I found out this is called apophenia, your brain pattern matching noise into language. My auditory cortex assembled that waveform into something that sounded like a word. It wasn't, but it sounded like, here. I am not being poetic. I am telling you what I heard. I am telling you what I heard. I am telling you that my nervous system heard that signal, and my brain said, here. And then the pulse in my chest hit me like a board. Hard. One hard strike, like something had knocked on the inside of my rib cage with a closed fist. Walsh ripped both earpieces off. Hale was on his feet. Ferris had come in from somewhere. What was that return? Ferris said. It's not I didn't have the word. I dropped the headset. It answered us. The surface of the ocean changed color. I'm going to be very plain about this because I know how it sounds. The ocean surface 200 meters off the port side. went from gray-green to a pale blue-white. Not phosphorescence, not bioluminescence from a bloom. Structural. It was coming from below, in a column, like a searchlight pointed up, and the column was wide, 20-30 meters across, and it is rising. It is rising, and it is lit from the inside like there is something alive in it that has never needed the sun. The temperature alarm on the hull sensor went off. Water temp at hull depth, 3.2 degrees above baseline. 3 degrees. In November Atlantic. Bridge. Sonar. I had the interphone up. Bridge. Sonar. I had the interphone up. We have a visual anomaly port side. Bearing 270 apparent. Distance 200 meters. Water surface illumination ascending. Hull temperature anomaly, plus 3 degrees and rising. Stand by, sonar. Stand by. Walsh was at the porthole. He was leaning into it. Dukes, he said. I went to the porthole and looked. The column of light below the surface, it had spread. The entire port side of the sea surface, as far as the porthole would let me see, was lit from below. Not uniform. It pulsed. 4 seconds on. Fading. The same rhythm that had been in my chest for 3 days. And in the light, below the surface, shapes. Not distinct shapes. Not creatures. More like, you know how you hold a flashlight against your hand in the dark and you can see through the skin? The blood, the bones, the structure of your own palm? It was like that. The light was inside the water, and the water was not water anymore. It was material. It was tissue, and the tissue had structure, veins, almost, channels that branched and branched again, membranes stretched between them, breathing in and out with each pulse. Oh God, Hale said from behind me. The interphone crackled. The interphone crackled. Bridge watch officer. Sonar. Bridge. We're getting surface disturbance at 300 meters portside. What are you showing? Same contact, I said. Temperatures at plus 4.8. Sir, I strongly recommend. Captain's on his way to the bridge. Stand by. 30 seconds. And then the ship's hull groaned. Not the groan of metal under strain. The groan of something pressing from outside. So feet deliberate. Like a hand pressing flat against a window to see through it better. Something was against the hull. Then the lights went out. Not all of them. The emergency circuit held. Red battle lanterns, everything in a color that made faces look like they were already dead. And in that red dark, the sonar display flickered, reset, and came back with a different picture. All 5 contacts had moved. Sierra 1 was at 200 feet. 200 feet. The surface of the ocean is here. 200 feet is right there. Basically the bottom of a continental shelf. It's nothing. It's the distance from the street to the top of a building. And it was right below us. Sierras 2 through 5 had closed. Within 5 miles of our position, in a square formation, like a perimeter. Sierras 2 through 5 had closed. Within 5 miles of our position, in a square formation, like a perimeter. And there was a new contact on bearing 090. Range, 2 miles. Depth, 140 feet. Something was on the surface. Walsh had moved back from the porthole to his scope. He said, I can see it on the starboard display. Passive acoustic. It's not submerged. The 1MC crackled. Hargrove's voice. General quarters. All hands man battle stations. This is not a drill. And then, under his voice, after he'd let go of the button, using the ship's own public address system as a carrier, Walsh's voice. Walsh's voice saying words Walsh had never said. We are here. We have been here. We are listening. Come down. Walsh looked at me from across the sonar room. I don't know how to describe his face. Not afraid. Something that was past afraid. Something that looked more like recognition. Here is what happened above decks in the next 2 hours. I wasn't there for all of it, but I heard it on the 1MC and the bridge recordings. And I saw the aftermath. On the port side, at the waterline, the light column had produced a physical structure. Hargrove saw it from the bridge wing. Hargrove saw it from the bridge wing. He described it in his incident log before that log was taken from him. A vertical formation, translucent, approximately 30 meters high, rising from the surface of the ocean. It was not rigid. It moved the way a jellyfish's bell moves, a slow rhythmic compression and expansion. It was lit from within, with the same blue-white light, and its surface, in his words, not mine, appeared to have a texture consistent with biological tissue, at close range. 30 meters, about 100 feet, rising out of the ocean, no base visible below the surface, no attachment point, just there. Petty Officer Second Class Okonkwo was a machinist's mate assigned to hull watch during general quarters. He was 26 years old. From Lagos. He played the harmonica badly and with great enthusiasm, and was generally considered a serious morale asset aboard the Stalwart. He'd been in the Navy for 4 years. He had a way of being useful in any situation. The guy you wanted next to you in a problem because he moved fast and didn't freeze. He froze. I know he froze because 2 other men on the weather deck saw it happen. He saw the structure, and he stopped moving, and then he walked to the rail. He saw the structure, and he stopped moving, and then he walked to the rail, not jumped, not fell. Walked the way you walk through a door you've opened before, and went into the water and into the light. No one reached him in time. No one knows if reaching him would have mattered. The water where he went in didn't splash. It closed around him the way mud closes around a stone. Smooth, complete, final. I was in the sonar room when the temperature of the hull sensor passed +9 degrees. I was in the sonar room when the 1MC carried Walsh's assembled voice again. It is not cold. It is not cold. Come down. I was in the sonar room when Hale said, contact at 40 feet. It's under the keel. And I was in the sonar room when the towed array stopped transmitting. Not damaged, still transmitting but not sending us anything back. Transmitting into the water, and the water was not returning. The towed array was still there. The cable was still attached, but what was at the end of the cable was now surrounded by the thing from below, wrapped in it, and the acoustic energy was going into it and not returning. It had swallowed our ears. Walsh said, Dukes, bearing 090, topside contact. Bearing 090, topside contact. I'm getting language. What do you mean language? The passive hydrophone on the hull. Audio channel. He pressed one earpiece to his ear. His eyes went somewhere else. It's trying to speak. I put my headset on the audio channel. The sound was human in scale. Not a hum, not a mechanical noise. Something that was reaching for voice the way a man reaching for something just out of reach stretches his whole body. A series of tones that weren't quite words, weren't quite music, but were absolutely deliberate. And underneath them, at the foundation of everything, at the frequency I could only feel and not hear, the pulse. Faster now. Urgent. Turn off the recorder. Hargrove's voice came on the interphone. He was on the bridge. Sonar bridge. Turn off the strip chart recorder. I did not turn off the strip chart recorder. What happened in the next 40 minutes? Hargrove ordered the deck gun crews to fire on the topside contact, 2.50 caliber mounts, and the aft 25 cannon. They fired. Where my master in an untamed wrath? What I read to the afternoon was, every day I fired blue, arrows going into the red, the rounds hit. I heard them connect through the hull, the difference between a round hitting water and a round hitting something with more structure to it. The rounds hit. I heard them connect through the hull, the difference between a round hitting water and a round hitting something with more structure to it. Hitting the column produced a sound like throwing rocks at a church bell. That deep, resonant ring, each round. The structure didn't shatter, it didn't collapse. It absorbed each impact, and the ring faded, and the column kept breathing. The 2.5 cannon briefly caused a reaction. The structure drew back, contracted. The light inside it dimmed for maybe 15 seconds, and then it expanded again. larger than before, and part of it, an extension, an arm, I'll call it that for lack of a better word, reached the ship's rail. Ensign James Yates was at the aft rail with a damage control party when the extension reached the deck. I didn't see it happen. I heard what happened from another man's description. The extension touched Yates on the shoulder, just touched him. Contact. He went rigid, upright, standing, rigid. The men around him tried to pull him away. He didn't move. He was stiff the way something gets when it has been cold for a long time. His face, the man who described it said his face had gone still, like the muscles had stopped, not dead. His eyes were moving. His eyes were moving, but nothing else was. They carried him inside. He never spoke again. He's alive somewhere. He's alive somewhere. I've never tried to find out where. Hargrove ordered the ship to maneuver, change heading, increase speed, push away from the structure. The engines answered. We turned. We accelerated. The structure came with us. It wasn't attached to the hull. It just paced us. 30 meters off the port side, keeping our speed, keeping our bearing, like a dog walking alongside a man who's trying to leave. Then, I look at the radar. I am looking at the radar right now. In that room, in that red light, and the return is there, moving when we move, stopping when we stop. The underwater contacts had not moved. The semicircle formation was there, and as we moved north, they moved north, maintaining the perimeter. At this point, Hargrove made the decision I still don't know what to do with. He ordered the deep submergence vehicle deployed. The stalwart had a small DSV, a research submersible. One pilot rated to 8,000 feet. Lieutenant J.G. Carl Price was the DSV pilot. Carl Price was 27. From Sacramento, he had a degree in ocean engineering, and he'd been in Navy diving programs since his sophomore year at Cal. He had a degree in ocean engineering, and he'd been in Navy diving programs since his sophomore year at Cal. He was the best submersible pilot I ever saw. Smooth, methodical, the kind of man born to work in a sealed metal sphere under a mile of ocean. He had no physical fear of the water. He found it peaceful. He called the deep ocean the quiet place. And he meant it as a compliment. He meant it the way people mean it when they say, somewhere is the first place they ever felt at home. He thought, Hargrove thought, the submersible could go down, observe the underwater contacts directly, gather hard intelligence, and return. Dr. Marsh found out when the DSV was already being prepped for launch. She came to the sonar room. She didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there. They're going to send Price down, I said. I know, she said. I tried. Walsh was on the display. He'd been on the display through everything. One earpiece hanging. The habit he couldn't break even now. He said, without turning around, if he goes down there, he's not coming back up. No one disputed that. We sat with it. Price was briefed, suited, and launched at 1714. The DSV went over the side on the crane. The DSV went over the side on the crane. The structure on the port side had moved back when the crane operated, retreated, like it didn't want to interfere, like it was being patient. I watched it on radar, a faint surface echo, sitting off the port side, waiting. Price's voice came over the underwater telephone at 1722. On the surface, preparing to dive. I have a visual on the structure to my port. It looks, a pause. It looks like a lung. He went under at 1724. The first 20 minutes of his dive, his reports were routine. 50 feet, 100, descent rate normal. Water temperature nominal. He could see the light below him increasing as he went deeper, the blue-white illumination. At 300 feet, he reported the water around him was becoming more complex. He used that word. I have never forgotten it. More complex. Like the water had more in it than water should. At 600 feet, I have lost my reference for the seafloor. I cannot determine depth by looking down. It's like descending into a cloud, except the cloud is lit from inside. I can see what look like structures, not geological, biological. You know how a cross-section of a tree looks? The rings? The rings? Like that, except the rings are three-dimensional, and the whole structure is too large to see the edges of. I can see the tissue of it, the circulation in it. Something moves through these structures, not like water moves, like blood moves. The color of it is... He stopped. I don't have a word for the color. He went to 1,000 feet. His instruments showed the seabed still at 14,000, but he said the structures he was seeing were already bigger than the ship above him. I'm losing my compass, he said at 1,100 feet. Magnetic compass is spinning. Gyros compensating. Water temp at hull is +12 relative to surface. The biologics around me, they're reacting to my sonar transponder. When it pings, they move toward it. Not aggressively. Curiously. At 1,400 feet, he went quiet for 8 minutes. When he came back, his voice was different. Not afraid. Calmer than before. I want you to understand the specific quality of it. He wasn't calmed by drugs, or by someone telling him it was going to be okay. He sounded the way a person sounds in a place they have been looking for their whole life without knowing it. Okay, he said. Okay, I'm going to describe what I see. I think you need to hear this. His voice on the underwater telephone, rising through 14,000 feet of ocean. It's not a creature. I thought it was going to be a creature. It's not. It's a city, almost. Except a city that's alive. Everything here is alive, and everything here is connected. The structures I saw from above, their roots, or branches, or both, I can't tell the direction of growth. I can see the light through them, through the tissue of them. And the tissue is moving. There's circulation. Like blood moves through a body. Except what's circulating is light. He stopped. When he spoke again, his voice had slowed. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. That's when I knew. I don't feel like I'm in danger, he said. I feel like I'm being... The word he used was received. Lieutenant Price, Hargrove on the underwater telephone, his voice stripped of everything now. Just a man's voice. Lieutenant Price, you are to ascend immediately. That is a direct order. Commander, Price said, and there was something gentle in his voice that hurt me very badly. That is a direct order. Commander, Price said, and there was something gentle in his voice that hurt me very badly. I think you should understand that the reason it hasn't hurt anyone who didn't make contact voluntarily is because it isn't trying to hurt anyone. It's trying to learn us. It's been learning us since the first contact. The reason it replayed Walsh's voice is because that's how it introduces itself. It gives back what it's been given. It was showing us it had been listening. And now, the voice changed again. Awe in it. Pure awe. Commander, it knows I'm here. It knows I'm in the vehicle. I can feel it noticing. A long pause. I'm going to go a little deeper, he said. Price, that is. It's okay, he said. It's okay, Walsh. If you can hear me. And here he said something that made Walsh take both hands off the console and press them flat on the desk. Tell Claire that the dolphins are beautiful down here. That was the last communication we could verify as originating from Price. After that, Walsh's voice assembled on the underwater telephone. He is here. He is learning. We are learning. Come down. And under that, from somewhere very deep, a sound that might have been laughter, or might have been the structural resonance of something too enormous to fully perceive, or might have been the structural resonance of something too enormous to fully perceive. The surface structure had multiplied while Price descended. 3 distinct columns now, both sides of the ship, lit from within, pulsing. And they were changing at their edges, becoming more varied, more detailed, like something that had been practicing a shape and was getting better at it. Walsh had both earpieces on. He had not moved since Price's last transmission. Walsh, I said. He didn't answer. Walsh. I put a hand on his shoulder. He turned slowly and looked at me, through me. like I was in the way of something he was trying to see. "They're beautiful," he said. "Walsh, focus on me." I shook his shoulder. "I need you on the scope." He blinked. Once. He turned back to the display. "I'm here," he said more clearly. "I'm here. Sorry. For a second I had the..." He touched his chest, pressed his palm flat against his sternum. "You've been feeling this since the first day, haven't you?" "Yes," I said. "That's the signal," he said. "The whole time. It was talking to us the whole time. We just didn't." He stopped. "I can almost understand it." "Don't," I said. He looked at me. His eyes were clear. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. I have a daughter. I'm not going anywhere." "Okay," I said. "Then stay with me." "I'm with you," he said. He turned back to the display. "I'm with you." Hargrove came down. He came to the sonar room at 1908, after Price's last transmission, and he stood behind the display, and he looked at the contact picture, Sierra 1 below us, Sierras 2 through 5 circling, and his face was the face of a man who has run out of the thing that was keeping him going. Not afraid. That came later. First, empty. The architecture of the man still standing there without the thing that made it architecture. "Dr. Marsh is preparing a distress signal on the emergency circuit," he said. "Good," Walsh said. He didn't turn around. Hargrove said, "I should have listened to her." Neither of us answered that. He stood there another moment. Then he moved toward the hatch to go back up to the bridge, and he stopped. He stopped in the hatchway. One of the 3 columns off the starboard side had reached the hull at deck level. I could hear it through the bulkhead. A soft, sustained pressure, like a hand pressing flat, and through the metal and the water, very faintly, the infrasound pulse. And through the metal and the water, very faintly, the infrasound pulse. Hargrove put one hand on the hatchway combing. His head dropped. He said very quietly, "Walsh, what did it do with Price?" Walsh said, "It's not a what, sir. It's a who." Hargrove straightened up. He walked back through the hatch toward the bridge. "What I know about the next 20 minutes is from boatswain's mate 2nd Class Daniels, who was on the bridge and survived." Hargrove stood at the bridge windows and looked at the starboard structure, which was now at deck level, illuminated from within. Pulsing. He stood there for a long time. Then he walked to the bridge wing door. He opened it. He stepped out. Daniels followed. He said Hargrove was standing at the bridge wing rail with both hands on it, looking at the structure. It was 20 feet away. It was not moving toward him. It was moving toward him the way something moves when it's trying to look like it isn't, and everyone knows it is. Very slowly, very gently, Hargrove said, and Daniels heard this clearly. "They're not hostile." Daniels said, "Sir, we should get inside." Hargrove said, "We made noise. We frightened them. We pinged them with maximum power and they were afraid. We pinged them with maximum power, and they were afraid. The way an animal is afraid." "Commander," Hargrove let go of the rail. He took one step toward the structure. Daniels grabbed his arm with both hands and pulled back hard. Hargrove didn't resist. He came back from the rail, but he kept looking at it. He kept looking at it with a face. Daniels described it to me much later, in a letter he wasn't supposed to write, with a face that had grief on it. Not fear. Grief. The face of a man realizing, all at once and all the way to the bottom of himself, what his certainty had cost, what he had set in motion by being sure of what he knew. They went back inside. Daniels steered him toward his sea cabin. He sat down on his bunk and looked at his hands for a long time. Then he asked, "How many men have I lost?" And that was the end of Commander Hargrove. Not dead, not taken, sitting on his bunk, hands in his lap, asking a question he already knew the answer to and couldn't stop asking. Daniels got Dr. Marsh, and Marsh got on the emergency circuit, and it was Dr. Elaine Marsh, civilian DARPA liaison, 2 sweaters, Coffee in a press. Who gave the order to make best speed north? We left feet. We ran. We left feet. We ran. The structures receded. As we accelerated, not immediately, they came with us for almost 2 hours. 3 pale columns in the dark. Atlantic, lit from within, moving alongside us, escorting us out, like they wanted to see us go. The underwater contacts stayed at depth but maintained their formation relative to the ship. 5 shapes in the deep water. Keeping pace, at 22:45, a signal came in on the underwater telephone. Not Price's voice, not Walsh's assembled voice, something that had learned from both of them and was not quite either. Fragments of both voices, and something else, something that had no human origin, but had been shaped by human frequencies the way clay takes the shape of what presses into it. A single phrase, assembled from multiple sources. We will remember you. Walsh heard it. He took his headset off. He sat back in his chair. He put his face in his hands. Dukes, he said. His voice was muffled. I'm here, I said. I just need a minute. He took his minute with his face in his hands and Claire's photograph taped to the corner of the console, just below the light. Then he put his hands down. Okay, he said. He picked up his headset. He went back to work. The structures fell behind, around 0245. Just stopped keeping pace, sank back, and disappeared. The deep contacts had done the same. One by one, Sierras 2 through 5 had descended beyond our detection range, returning to whatever depth they lived at. Sierra 1 went last. Slow, like it was reluctant, but the pulse was still there, faint, slower, like a sound fading with distance as you drive away. At 0315, we crossed 43 degrees north latitude. Walsh called it out. The pulse stopped. Not gradually, not fading out. Stopped. One moment it was there, that thumb pressing the inside of my sternum, and the next moment, it was gone. Gone the way a sound stops when you close a door. Clean. Absolute. The air in the sonar room changed. I don't know how else to say it. Something that had been present was absent, and the quality of the absence was unlike anything I had felt before, like stepping out of a place you didn't know was pressing on you until it stopped. Walsh pulled one earpiece off. He looked at me. It's gone, he said. Yeah, I said. He exhaled, a long, long exhale that had been saved up for days. Neither of us said anything else for a while. The ocean outside was just ocean, dark, cold, moving without intelligence, without attention, without any pulse below sound. Just water. I put my hand on my chest. Flat. Pressed gently. Nothing there, I cried. I don't know why. I just couldn't stop. They were waiting for us in Rhoda. Not the usual crew. Different men. A gray hull with no markings I could identify, and the men who came aboard were in civilian clothes and didn't introduce themselves. They moved through the stalwart with a practiced efficiency that told me this was not their first time doing exactly this. They had boxes. They had a specific list. The strip chart recordings were on the list. They took them all, every week's worth from the entire deployment. Walsh and I had agreed, wordlessly, the night before we made port. We'd agreed without discussing it because we had worked together long enough that some things don't need words. He kept a 6-inch section of the Sierra 1 velocity trace from the first day. I kept a 14-inch section from the night of the full manifestation. The pulse frequency trace burned in, and Walsh's ballpoint annotations in the margin calling out the depth readings. I kept a 14-inch section from the night of the full manifestation. The pulse frequency trace burned in, and Walsh's ballpoint annotations in the margin calling out the depth readings. We each folded our section small and put it in our sock, under the foot, inside the boot. The men in civilian clothes were thorough, but they did not strip search us. I was taken to a room in the Rhoda Naval Station that had no window, no nameplate on the door. 1 table, 3 chairs, a man in a suit who looked like a man in a suit, maybe 50, a face designed to be forgettable. He did not ask me what happened. He told me, "The incidents during your deployment are documented as follows," he said, reading from a file with no identifying marks on the cover. Unusual sea state activity consistent with underwater geological event on the Lucky Strike segment of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Associated acoustic anomalies consistent with seismic activity. Loss of personnel Okonkwo attributed to man overboard incident during rough weather. Vehicle deployment, DSV, lost to instrument failure at depth. Crew member Price lost with vehicle. Medical casualty Yates attributed to exposure incident on weather deck. Hargrove medical evacuation to Bethesda Naval Hospital. Diagnosis stress-related psychotic episode. He closed the file. Hargrove medical evacuation to Bethesda Naval Hospital. Diagnosis stress-related psychotic episode. He closed the file. You will sign a statement confirming these events, as documented. Those aren't the events, I said. He looked at me. His eyes were very steady. These are the events, he said. I was there. I know you were, he said. His voice was not unkind. Sign the form. I signed the form. I signed it because I was 24 years old and tired in a way I had never been tired before, and because all I wanted in the world was to go home to Macon, Georgia, and smell pine trees and eat food that wasn't from a government mess, and see a sky that went all the way up without anything in it. I signed it because the man across the table had a way of sitting that communicated without words, that not signing was a choice with a destination that led somewhere much worse than Macon. I got on a plane. I went home. I was medically separated 8 months later for auditory damage and associated psychological sequelae. That's the phrase on the separation papers, psychological sequelae, which means, in the language of a man in a suit in a windowless room, what you saw is leaking out of your face, and we don't want it visible. Chief Ferris retired the following year. He moved to a house in Tennessee and was reportedly fined for about 3 years, and then began spending his time researching ocean acoustic phenomena and leaving messages for researchers at Woods Hole and Scripps that became increasingly alarming in content. His family had him evaluated in 1979. He was in a facility in Knoxville for several years after that. I don't know if he's still alive. I haven't tried to find out. Denny Hale left the Navy 6 months after the deployment, went back to Ohio, drove trucks for a long time. He died in 2011. Heart attack, 59 years old. I saw it in a search. As far as I know, it had nothing to do with this. Dr. Elaine Marsh was the one I tried to find. It took me until 1986. A researcher I hired, a college kid who was good at library records, found a paper she'd published in 1979 under a different name about deep ocean thermoacoustics in a minor European journal. It was written in a very careful way that said nothing directly and implied everything. The references section had 4 citations that did not exist in any library he could find. In 1988, I found where she was living. A veterans cooperative in Rhode Island. Not a hospital, a private residence for people who don't function well anymore in the standard world. I drove up in October. 3 hours of administrative process to get in to see her. She was sitting in a garden, a blanket over her lap. She looked 10 years older than she should have. She was looking at the water. The cooperative was on a tidal inlet, a gray October inlet with no particular charm. She was looking at it the way I look at water sometimes, with knowledge. I sat down next to her. I said her name. She turned and looked at me, and it took a long moment, and then she knew me. She said, "Ray." "Dr. Marsh," I said. She looked back at the water. She said quietly, as if she'd been saving this for someone specific, "They're learning to breathe up here." I drove home. I didn't stop until Pennsylvania. I pulled off at a rest stop and sat in my car for an hour looking at nothing. The strip of chart paper is in a steel coffee tin on the top shelf of my hall closet. The tin has a red lid and used to have Maxwell House on the side, but that wore off. The tin has a red lid and used to have Maxwell House on the side, but that wore off. The paper is thermal paper, old thermal paper, the kind they don't make anymore. Yellowish brown now from age, but the traces are still legible. 14 inches long, you can see the Sierra 1 velocity trace in the first 4 hours, a slow, gentle curve consistent with a 3-knot dry feet. Then the step function, the line goes nearly vertical, then levels off at a rate that Walsh's handwriting in the margin has annotated in ballpoint pen. 78.3 Ks. Confirmed X3. Walsh's handwriting, in pen, in the margin. Real. And on the other end of the strip, the pulse frequency trace from the night of the manifestation. A clean wave at sub 20 Hz. Timed, regular 4 seconds on, 4 seconds off. Burned into thermal paper by a machine that no longer exists, on a ship that was decommissioned in 1978, and whose records were transferred to an archive that a FOIA request in 1995 told me does not contain what I'm looking for. The Antarctic Treaty, 1959. The Outer Space Treaty, 1967. The Seabed Arms Control Treaty, 1971. You look at those 3 documents in sequence, and you notice something. They are all territorial demarcations. They are all territorial demarcations. Agreements between otherwise hostile superpowers to keep weapons and sovereign claims out of specific domains. Outer space, the deep seabed, Antarctica, and they were all negotiated with uncommon speed by governments that in every other context could barely agree on the time of day. The Seabed Arms Control Treaty was signed in 1971, February of 1971, 9 months before our deployment. It prohibits the placement of nuclear weapons on the ocean floor beyond a 12-mile coastal limit. The same ocean floor, above the same ridge systems. The United States and the Soviet Union both signed it. Enthusiastically, urgently. I have spent 50 years thinking about why. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration recorded an unexplained ultra-low frequency acoustic signal in 1997. They called it the bloop, detectable by hydrophones thousands of miles apart. Powerful enough to be picked up across an ocean basin. NOAA said it was consistent with the sound profile of a very large icequake. A glacier calving. No glacier that size calved in that location in 1997. The signal's origin point was the South Pacific. The frequency envelope was inconsistent with geological sources. NOAA declassified the recording in 2002 and put it on their website as an unsolved acoustic mystery. I have listened to it. The frequency profile is not identical to what we recorded in November 1971, but the shape is similar. The pulse pattern is similar. And since 1997, the bloop has not been heard again. But other signals have. Different frequencies, different locations. The Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the South Atlantic. They are not staying still. The ocean is warmer than it was in 1971. The thermal layers are changing. The acoustic propagation channels, the SOFAR channel, the sound shadow layer, are shifting as the water warms. The deep sound channel is rising in depth, which means the range at which certain frequencies can travel is increasing, and the boundary that stopped them at 43 degrees north in November 1971, where the pulse stopped, where the air changed, where Walsh and I breathed for the first time in 4 days, that was a thermal boundary. A specific temperature gradient at depth. A line in the water. Lines move. Lines move. That pressure in my chest, the thumb pressing from the inside against the sternum, 4 seconds on, 4 seconds off. It went away when we crossed 43 north in the dark in November 1971. Gone like a closed door, and it stayed gone until 1997, the year of the bloop. It came back faint, like a radio station you used to listen to when you lived somewhere else, just barely coming in at the edge of your range. I felt it, and I sat down at my kitchen table, and I pressed my palm flat against my chest, the way I have been doing for 26 years by then. And I thought, they moved. It's stronger now than it was in 1997. Not strong, not urgent, very far away, but getting less far. I press my hand flat against my sternum in the dark sometimes, at 3 a.m., in the house in Macon where I have lived alone for 22 years. I press it flat, and I feel the rhythm of it, 4 seconds on, 4 seconds off. And I think about what Dr. Marsh said in that October garden before I drove away. They're learning to breathe up here. And I think about what Price said at 1,400 feet under the Lucky Strike segment. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I think about what Price said at 1,400 feet under the Lucky Strike segment. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The thing that lives below the mid-ocean ridges, below the seabed, in the seabed. That is the seabed. That is the membrane we sail on and the skin we have been pressing our instruments against for 150 years of oceanography. That thing does not sleep. It does not stop. It breathes in the dark at 18 hertz, and the dark is getting warmer, and the walls of the place it lives are getting thinner. 43 degrees north. That's roughly the latitude of Boston, of Rome, of the Black Sea coast. That was the boundary in 1971. I'm not saying it still is. 4 seconds on, 4 seconds off, right now, as I speak. Right here in my chest, like someone is pressing their thumb from the inside and not letting go. I've been feeling it for 53 years, and it has never not once felt like it was getting farther away.